3 minutes after.
Yeah. Oops.
There's Wendy.
Oh,
Oh, wonderful.
hi, Wendy.
Good evening.
I wasn't sure you'd be able to get on with end of the year stuff, so glad you could join us.
Yeah, I have grades due tomorrow for both the 9 weeks and the final. So I got those done before I left school.
Good. All right, cool. So, so this is, we are, unit or chapter 5 of the Dickinson series. I'm going to be doing part 1. So the last 2 chapters we're going to do over the next 3 weeks. So tonight, the 8th and the 15th. And part of that is because we had to skip a Wednesday when I was out sick. And we had already scheduled the Hang 10 activity on the 22nd. And we didn't want to, I don't want to try and have everybody come back the following week. I figure we'll just try and get this done in the next 3 weeks. So the homework between tonight and next Wednesday is going to be a little bit on the heavier side. But a lot of it is just, especially out of the book, it's just talking about the different prophets between the 2 books, between the 2 units, 5 and 6. So we'll do the best we can with doing that. And I'm trying to think. We have a special guest, I believe, coming this Sunday. You may remember the nurture team is sponsoring a staff member at Camp Bethel. So we have, I would say, about an 80% chance that that person will be able to join us on Sunday and we will be able to meet them. And so we're excited about that opportunity to meet that person. I don't know of other plans. Luke and I and Bob have been playing phone tag the last 2 days. So we'll let everyone know of other arrangements as needed. I don't know who the person is yet. We won't know until I think Friday. Let's see, the 22nd. We do have our church picnic in July. So that should be on the calendar. I'm not aware of anything else off the top of my head at the moment. So our opening devotion is from Psalm 146. And we'll share that for our opening prayer. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord, O my soul. I will praise the Lord for as long as I live. I will sing praises to my God all my life long. Do not put your trust in princes, in mortals, in whom there is no help. When their breath departs, they return to the earth. On that very day, their plans will perish. Happy are those whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets the prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the strangers and upholds the orphan and the widow. But the way of the wicked, the Lord brings to ruin. For the Lord our God will reign forever. Your God, O Zion, for all generations. Praise the Lord. Just move this a little closer. So I picked that one because one of the responsibilities of the prophet was to remind the people of Israel as well as Judah and the kings, the rulers, that they are the Lord's, that they are God's. And that, oftentimes we forget that we place more value into the human-made rules and regulations and things of that nature. And so this psalm is a reminder that we're to praise to God with everything, and that God is a just and righteous God. So just a reminder of our covenant to respect and listen and communicate, open freely with one another, provide constructive feedback, and speak from your own space. So our objectives for chapter 5, we're looking at the prophets, both the major and the minor prophets, and we're reading 4 callings of 3 different prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah 2 times, and Ezekiel. And we're just looking at the student guide. And then next week, we will be looking more at the minor prophets. Oops. And there we go. Chapter 6, we'll be looking at what's going on outside of Israel and Judah, looking at up to the age of the empires, including Babylon. And so that will be our challenge next week. And we're looking to understand what the role of the prophet is and to see how far we can take it in terms of how we can understand the prophets in our modern day context or our modern day humanity. So that's kind of the overview of what we hope to accomplish in chapter 5. So what I want to do is kind of look at each of the 4 the readings. And so I have them listed up here, and that should be ask, not as. So what did God ask the prophet to do? And we'll just discuss that as a group. I think we can
Kevin?
kind of, yes.
You haven't shared your presentation yet.
What's that?
You haven't shared your presentation yet.
Oh, I thought I did. Huh. That's weird, showing share screen. Give me 1 second.
We were able to see it, I thought.
Yeah,
Or maybe
saw it.
you came in late, Wendy, that might be it.
Mm-mm.
It shouldn't matter, but let me try again.
Yeah, it now.
Are you able to see it now, Wendy?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Shouldn't matter when you come in late like that, though.
Yeah.
She wasn't late.
Well, I didn't think she was, but I mean,
Well, she came in after we started recording, so I don't know if that made a,
I don't know. Well, that's
Okay.
okay. Thank you, Wendy, for saying something. Okay. So we'll be looking at the 4 prophets, these specific instances of communication between the prophet and God, and asking several questions. So each slide will have the question with that we're addressing, and we'll just kind of look at each of the prophet story. One side note real quick. There are 2 forms of the word, and I didn't think to put them on a slide. So prophecy is what you are doing. It's the actual thing that you're doing. And that is spelled with a C. And prophesy is the verb form of it, is what you are actually doing. So if you see a C, the letter C, you pronounce it prophecy. It's what is being shared with you. And if you see it with an S, prophesy, that's the verb. That's what you are prophesying to the people. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. So we will look at Isaiah 20, chapter 20, all of the verses 1 to 6. So the question we have before us is, what did God ask Isaiah to do in this chapter?
Walk
Well-
around naked.
Run around naked, run around naked, yes, with his butt
I
facing
read
the
that he
Egyptian.
really wasn't naked.
He
That there's another word that you can translate, and that I don't know. I read that basically he took off outer garments but still had an undergarment on. So
Right,
the word for naked can sometimes be translated as without the outer clothing or something like that. So
gotcha.
So
uh,
this wasn't the first nudist colony.
no, I think it was just to basically, I think they said the same word was used when David,
Celebrated through the
dance.
streets, yeah,
yeah, and certainly David didn't go naked through the streets. He just took off his royal cloak or whatever. But I mean, I think the point of it was to show the Israelites that by hooking up with the Egyptians, they were ultimately going to meet the fate of what he is demonstrating, which is they're going to be humiliated and walking through the streets unclothed.
right, yeah,
Well, Chuck, I believe what you're saying, but it talks about the Egyptians being what uses the same word naked there with their buttocks uncovered.
My translation says their buttocks bared.
Well, I mean, that might happen to the bad people, but I don't think the point of it was that Isaiah didn't really do that.
I was looking, my commentary doesn't really elaborate on this chapter, so I don't have anything specific in terms of the word play or whether it's a literal walking around naked. It does say having their, walking with barefoot and buttocks uncovered to the shame of the Egyptians. But it does look like he is supposed to, in some way, shape, or form, bring shame to those who are
Well, it would bring shame
the
to,
troops, yeah.
I mean, it's saying that God's the people of Ethiopia, which is Cush,
Mhm.
and Egypt, which they were trying to form an alliance with, they're going to be defeated and shamed, and the Israelites will likewise meet a similar fate.
Right. Yeah.
Well, whatever it was, he did this for 3 years. Seems like
Yes.
a long time.
It
Well,
is a
they
long
commented
time.
on that too, and they said he probably really didn't do it every day for 3 years.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so we'll look at Jeremiah chapter 19. Oops, that didn't work right. Shoot. And what was it that God asked Jeremiah to do in this one?
Buy a clay jar. Take
To
it out
buy,
into the
to
valley.
buy it and break it, yes.
Oh, yeah, right.
So in verse 1, he talks about buying the potter's, earthenware jug. And then in verse 10, break it in the sight of shoot.
Well, the site that they name, again, I cheated and read online some stuff, but that was basically a place outside the city where they put all the trash.
Mhm.
And so there would have already been a lot of earthenware jugs there that are pottery broken up. And it was just symbolizing the fact that all of this is going to end up in a bad place. you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
It all's gonna go to the trash heap.
Right.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, if you think about what's thrown away and why something goes into the trash heap, I mean, it kind of makes sense that if you continue on this path, that's what's going to happen. So, yeah. Hey, Jared.
Hello, I forgot my study guide again, but I'm probably good without it.
You're fine. We are looking at the object lessons from each of the prophets.
Okay,
So we're on the second Jeremiah, getting ready to
Okay.
go to third one.
gotcha, thank you.
So on Jeremiah chapter 32. What did God ask Jeremiah to do?
Let's see. Oh, wait a minute. That's the one with the trash heap, isn't it?
No,
No.
Jeremiah 19 is the one with the trash heap,
Oh, right. That's where he has the deed.
right?
right. Yeah. Yes. He basically says you go buy land from your brother, right, or somebody,
Mhm.
and seal it up and put it in a jar. And then when you come back from exile, you'll have your land.
Right, yeah,
So he made a good investment.
right. And he talks about how much and so forth. And he goes to his cousin.
Yeah, cousin. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So,
It's interesting, because if I
His
remember
uncle-
correctly, oh, sorry,
yeah, you're good.
17 shekels was not a small sum of money back then.
No, it's pretty
That was
expensive.
probably several months of wages.
Yeah. So it's about weight. So it'd be about 7 ounces.
Oh, that's
So-
it?
Give or take. I mean, 7
That was a-
ounces is
that was a
still
steal
like,
then.
well, I mean,
Today's
but if you think
terms,
about,
yeah.
I mean, if you think about by weight, because they're not using coins, they're using,
no, I know,
yeah. So, but, yeah. And that's if the scale is
Accurate.
just accurate, right? Yeah.
But I guess the whole point of that was to basically give hope to the remnant that returns, that
Mhm.
they will have something to return to.
Right, yeah. Yeah. All right, and we'll look at Ezekiel 4. This is a fun one. So what does God ask Ezekiel to do?
He asked him to make the original bread that is sold now at the co-op.
Well, it's pretty involved. He has him basically build a ramp, and then he's going to lay on it on his right side for a number of days, and then he's going to flip,
Right.
lay on his other side for 40 days. And then during that time, he has to eat the bread that's been made on the dung of a cow. And God is very gracious and letting him make this bread on cow dung and not on human dung.
Well,
So,
but the dung is just used to heat, for heat.
Right. Oh, I know. I was just.
It doesn't go in the bread.
Right. Oh, I see. Is that what that? Maybe I
Yeah.
misunderstood.
Yeah, the dung is just like the people,
Fuel.
the Bednites or what, the people that live in the desert today use camel dung to burn, dried camel dung. This would be dried cow dung.
It's fuel for the fire.
One too.
Oh, okay, I see. I got you now. Yeah.
Yeah, they
okay,
don't
I
put
got
it
you.
in the
All
bread.
right. Well, that's
We-
why I thought it was kind of weird the way mine phrases it kind of weird. Maybe I just didn't. Because it says,
Yeah.
I will let you have cow dung instead of human on which you may prepare your bread. So I just thought of it as like, almost like but as fuel for a fire, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
It's in
that,
My
Go ahead.
translation, and I'm looking at verse 12. Prepare and eat this food as you would barley cakes. While all the people are watching, bake it over a fire using dried human dung as fuel, and then eat the bread.
Right. Well, and then in verse 14, Ezekiel replies to God and says, I've never defiled myself in that way. So God kind of relents a little bit. So there is kind of this give and take conversation between
Right.
the prophet and between God. So,
Yeah, and then he does give him the option to use the cow dung.
right. Yeah. Cool. All right. Any questions about those four?
well, I think the interesting thing is what's the deal with lying on your side for those number of days?
So it has to do with if you look at verse
Verse 5 says that
5, yeah,
one day for each year of their sin. And then when he flips over for the 40 days, it's one day for each year of Judah's sin.
right. So
But-
it's kind of like he's prostrate, he's suffering for the sake of showing Israel and Judah what they've done. And so,
Yeah, but I think she pointed out that when you see the word 40, it doesn't always mean literally 40.
well,
Yeah.
right, but
And 390 goes back, they use the term a lot, 40 minus 1 or something. So that's, anyway,
yeah, I mean, I don't know if it would have been necessarily that long of a period of time, but I think, I think that he's telling him that he's gonna only be able to eat this particular type of meal. I mean, I think Ezekiel is kind of hunkering down for a period of time. And that, God doesn't want him to roll over, so he's literally tying him up to this board to lay on his side for some period. at
Right,
least. Yeah,
right.
so,
I guess that's to illustrate again to the people that, this is, you're going to be in a bad shape for
yeah,
a long time,
right, yeah,
depending on whether you're from Israel or Judah.
right, yeah. So the next question that we have before ourselves is, was the request done privately or publicly?
Mhm.
So Isaiah is the conversation between, let me double check, make sure I'm asking that right. Oh, was the action that God asked the prophet to do public or private? I'm sorry. So in Isaiah 20, was that a public display or a private display? I would say pretty
Looks like
public.
it was private.
Well, I mean, it's pretty public in that Egypt and Ethiopia are going to witness what he's doing.
Well, yeah, what the prophet does, but I mean, when God's telling him, he's not telling him, I don't know exactly if that's what you're getting at.
I think Kevin changed the question not to how the
Yeah,
request
I'm
was done,
sorry,
but
it
what
was-
was
yeah.
what was the action, public or
Oh,
private?
was the action? Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
The question could be read either way. So that's kind of why it's a little confusing. But I think they're asking, was the action done publicly or privately? And so I see this one pretty publicly. although the conversation between God and Isaiah is done private. This is between God and Isaiah. So to answer that piece of the question.
I don't know what would be the point of any of these if you did them privately.
Amen.
Right. Well, that's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that would be a good question. You know, does a tree fall? Does anybody hear it? So, yeah.
Well,
Well,
it seems to me everything, a lot, most of what the prophets did was for public consumption. I mean,
Right.
that was the whole point.
Yeah. So if we look at Jeremiah 19, I'm wondering if he did the purchasing of the jug separately, and then the breaking of the jug he did with those who were going to go with him, and then he pronounces everything in verse 15. He pronounces it to everyone at
Right.
the court of the house. So it's kind of a gradual increase of the public, of who's present in the public sphere. And then Jeremiah 32, this would be the purchasing of the deeds.
Hmm.
And it talks about giving it to the presence of the witnesses who signed the deed in verse 11 and 12. And so again, that's done in public. I guess you would have to have witnesses of the sale of the property, so that makes sense. And Ezekiel 4, again, he's doing that in full eye of all of the people, I would think.
Well, is he though?
Well, that's
Because
what I was-
the verse, because let's see, 3:23 is so I, well, Spirit-
Oh, what do you-
oh yeah, sorry, Ezekiel 3, verse 24, the Spirit entered into me and set me on my feet, and he spoke with me and said to me, go shut yourself inside your house. So,
Here.
and then verse 25, as for you mortal, cords shall be placed on you, and you shall be bound with them, so that you cannot go out among the people.
Oh, so this is happening in the house.
Yeah,
But then verse 27, you will
Yeah,
say to them.
yeah, but when I speak to you, I will open your mouth, and you shall say to them, thus says the Lord God. So it seems like this is more like this, what he made Ezekiel do is more for Ezekiel than for anyone else. Is what it kind of seems to me.
Right.
Because that was going to be after what he had done.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that unless everybody knew about it, it would be kind of pointless for Ezekiel to do this.
Not if it's for Ezekiel, it's not. Maybe God was having him do it, for him, for Ezekiel.
But in chapter 4, which is what we were studying, it has him clearly in verses 3 and 4, between you and the city, turn toward the city, And then this will be a warning to the people of Israel.
Yeah, but it's more or less symbolic. It's not like they actually can see this potentially.
Iron plate, set it up as an iron wall between you and the city.
But the city is Jerusalem, so he's basically building a miniature Jerusalem and then laying siege to it himself.
He said, this is a sign to the house of Israel.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really don't think God would do that to Ezekiel unless he was making a point.
Well, maybe he was making the point to Ezekiel.
My commentary does say that this is a discrete performance in reference to both chapter 3, 4, and into 5. So that it does seem like this is happening in a private setting.
It would be in a very close circle at the very most.
Right.
And it could be so word still might have gotten out, but it wasn't in a public area.
So Ezekiel never told anybody about it?
I don't think it's a question of not telling it. I think it's almost like I'm wondering if maybe this is almost like Jesus after his resurrection presenting himself to the disciples. So after Ezekiel has suffered in this manner, he goes to I'm trying to find who he's even talking to here. In Jerusalem, that he goes to them and says, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to be beset if you continue in the manner you're going by.
Okay.
In chapter 5, verse 11, the sin is they defiled the sanctuary with the detestable things they've done. And he goes on to talk about anger and judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is almost like this is the punishment that I have.
So this was Ezekiel's 40 days in the wilderness.
Yeah, I think so.
He was kind of acting out what was going to happen, what was going to happen to Israel.
And Judah.
Yes.
Right. Because you have to remember this would have been their the diaspora, so the destruction of the temple would be coming. So the punishment is however many years are outside of Jerusalem. That they are going to suffer pretty significantly.
Yeah, a lot of bad things are going to happen if you keep reading.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, chapter 6 or chapter 5 is pretty.
Chapter 6 is pretty bad.
I didn't get as far as chapter 6, but yeah. So, all right. We touched on a little bit in some of these as we talked about the symbolism of what God is acting. Was there any other comments or ideas in that regard as far as the symbolism for any of the prophets or prophecies, I guess? Okay. I think I'm double check. So if we think about the purposes of these lessons, why do we go through all of this imagery and suffering? Why not just tell the people what's going to happen? Why go through all these hoops and self mutilating actions?
Yes, because as the saying goes, actions speak louder than words.
Okay.
And they were showing how, they were showing the suffering that was going to come by suffering themselves. They weren't just saying, oh, this is going to happen, it's going to be terrible.
Mhm.
They were using themselves as examples of the suffering.
Okay.
Attention seeking.
Attention seeking.
Not
Yeah, and
necessarily.
Well, I'm not saying that as sometimes we talk about children being attention seeking as a negative thing. I'm not saying that it's a negative thing.
Right.
It's if you want people to pay attention, you do something to get their attention.
Yeah,
Right.
but in Ezekiel, he is doing that in private though. So
Well, I didn't think you were meaning it in the negative sense. I just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify what you meant by that, Vicky. So.
Yeah.
When I was wondering, I mean, you think about, so like the effectiveness of these types of lessons. I'm trying to think in terms of, I remember, and this was probably in the 80s, I guess, like you would always see images of animal rights activists throwing paint on women wearing fur, coming out of, I don't know, wherever they were coming out from, but like the lesson of that would have been much more profound, I would think, than just saying, you shouldn't wear animal skin. And that might not be the best example. I'm just thinking of how effective something like that would be. If you saw the prophet with like what I would presume to be pretty significant sores on their body, or emaciated for not eating very much in the case of Ezekiel, or even Isaiah running around partially or fully naked, that certainly catches your eye.
Well, I think too, it shows that it illustrates that they really took what God was saying them to heart. I mean, they were, it showed that they were driven by doing what they thought God wanted them to do, not and what God told them to do. This wasn't just something that they made up, that and they did it to the extreme, to the
Right.
and that's
point.
important, given in the latter days of Israel and Judah, there were false prophets everywhere,
Right.
and they were all talk and no action. And so I guess they were showing with their actions that they actually believed what they were saying.
Well, I mean, even Jesus warns his disciples there's going to be false prophets. So,
Yeah.
and in that same vein, it kind of goes on. I was thinking in terms of, and I forget the name of the baseball coach, who said after last week's events in Texas that the baseball game is going to go on, but during the national anthem, I'm not coming out. I'm staying in the, I guess, in the locker room. Like he didn't even come out to the dugout. Like he stayed in the locker room. And I wonder about the effectiveness of something like that was hidden. Like he's obviously missing from the sideline. But is that an effective way of getting the lesson out? Certainly he's being celebrated by some for his stance. But then you have on the flip side, you have Colin Kaepernick, who was very visibly not boycotting. Well, I guess he was boycotting the national anthem by taking a knee. And he was ostracized. So I wonder about the effectiveness of how we go about in the modern day certain prophetic condemnations of something going on in our modern day world.
I guess here there's a specific, I would say, loss that each one takes on by doing this.
Mhm.
There's negative consequences for them doing these actions. Ezekiel was emaciated, probably looked terrible, had to cut some of his hair off in chapter 5.
Mhm.
Jeremiah lost money on field that he was never going to be able to use.
Right. Yeah.
People thought he was weird when he broke the pot. If that coach wanted to make an effective statement, he would have just not showed up for the game or quit.
Hmm.
Because he would have then lost something because of that.
Right.
Whereas him just staying inside the locker room, it made a statement, but it really didn't have any impact on anything.
So do you think that the only way to make an impact is if there's a negative sacrifice that you have to make?
Not necessarily. I think it just shows the ability of someone's belief in something if they're willing to take on negative consequences
Okay.
for the action.
I gotcha. Okay. Any thoughts or comments to that?
That was just some rambling.
No, I brought it up. I'm curious, like if we think about how we tend to think about and the prophets, our role is to acknowledge and name the sin. So they acknowledge and name the sin, and they usually pinpoint very specific instances of how Judah or Israel have sinned against God. And generally speaking, we tend to speak in broader terms
Mhm.
instead of pointing to something specific to a community or to a culture. And so I'm just wondering in terms of how the church may or may not fill those roles as prophetic voices in the world. So
That's
I'm
actually
just, yeah,
That's actually an interesting point. Maybe to get something changed, you do have to be more specific and less broad sometimes.
sure.
Because it's like when you're trying to clean up a room somewhere, it's it's overwhelming till you start to focus on one thing at a time.
Sure. Right.
So
Any thoughts or comments?
Well, I think too, there's there's an entirely different means of communication back then versus now. I mean, we have social media and the prophets just had kind of word of mouth, there were no newspapers, there were no,
But
and it was, so for them to convince people, they really had to be convincing in their actions.
Right.
It was more than just talk. They had to be specific about what God said and what God told them to do and why that was happening.
yeah. No, that makes sense.
I do think that today we still have the same problem where, talk is cheap, even with more broadly disseminating, knowledge and information and viewpoints, it still kind of gets lost in the clutter sometimes if it's not too specific.
Right. So yeah, I mentioned one, but I was curious if anybody has any contemporary examples of this kind of prophetic, like a symbolic physical display of a message, either as a warning or as hope. So we acknowledge that there were several different types of prophecies, particularly with Jeremiah, one in the destruction and one in the hope of the land coming back. And so I just kind of shared a couple of examples of different types of symbols that could be displayed with a message. You have the swastika or the burning cross, or ones that give hope, which could be like a makeshift memorial at the site of a tragedy, or candles, others that you can think of. in a contemporary context of symbolic practices or images for the community.
Would you consider our sunflower theme for the people of Ukraine, or
Hmm.
our small candle that's lit for now several years for our Church of the Bread young girls who've been kidnapped?
When you think about the sense of solidarity that the sunflower has brought, and showing solidarity with the people of Ukraine, and in some vein condemning the actions of Russia. So I think that's a very good example. Yes. I would say the candle for the Nigeria would be a little bit more, although there was a very large outcry when the abduction originally occurred, that has certainly petered off quite a bit. And so that candle is probably more symbolic just in the denomination than in the larger world platform. I'm not sure if that's the right framing, but yeah. But I think that both of those are good examples. Yes. Other thoughts or examples of possible symbols? Sorry.
You have prisoners, political prisoners going on hunger strikes, which would be, I think, an example.
Okay, that's a good
Even-
example. Yeah,
Even to the point of some people dying.
yeah.
And that dates back, that happened, I think, back in the 70s or 60s with the Irish, when they were battling against Britain.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how long that's been a practice.
I think it's been a long time.
Yeah, like I was wondering if that would have been a thing in like World War I and World War II, but I'm not sure.
I'll look it up.
Yeah.
That was a thing in order to get the vote for women.
Oh, well, that's true.
Yeah.
Right. That's
Right.
true. Right, because they would force feed the women because you're right. Thank you, Vicky.
So apparently the fasting was used as a method of protesting injustice in pre-Christian Ireland
So
a long time ago.
yeah. So, but no, that's a good. Thank you, Vicky, for I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
And Lori noted that I think Gandhi did that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh, sorry.
I was just saying that that's a tried and true method of calling attention to injustice.
So I'm wondering, is that really a helpful method of calling attention?
I think so in many cases.
Okay. I'm just curious. Like, I mean, I think, in the case of Gandhi, like everybody was aware of what was happening. And I guess I would say his message certainly made a change in India's history. Yeah. And certainly the women that certainly changed how that happened. Yeah.
I'm not sure about this example, but I think it's on certainly the national scale. But as they're trying to build the pipeline, we've got protesters who are setting themselves up on top of cranes or in trees, and they choose to live there for whatever time, they're allowed to live there till they're carted away. I mean, I guess that could also be someone's message, right? Of a warning, maybe even as a hope. Maybe it's both. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you think of anything you would be challenged to possibly be encouraged or to think about in terms of what you believe or what you think maybe should happen? Are there any object lessons that you can think of that you would be?
Well, marches are one of the things that we do quite frequently.
Marching, okay, yeah,
And, that's done by many, many groups. I know that people from the church have been, we went up after the Parkland shooting for the march with all the young people in Washington, several of us from church.
right,
And I can remember as a youth going to annual conference marches that were about the Vietnam War.
mhm,
I remember very clearly we carried the sign, repent.
mm, well, yeah. Okay,
But I also think about all the people who, the Palestinian news reporter who died not long ago, and then there were all the problems with her funeral. You remember that in the news?
Mhm.
So her action wasn't, but she was reporting what was going on. So I think that's an action that certainly can have an effect.
right,
So would funerals be a one of these events maybe?
Yeah, well, I think the way they were carried out and in that instance, they were told they couldn't have a public display of, they wanted the body whisked away and put in the nursing home in a car or something, but the people insisted on carrying the casket in the streets.
okay,
That was a symbolic act of defiance.
right, of whoever told them not to do that, yeah. No, I
Yeah,
think that would be that would be a pretty profound act of civil disobedience.
Right.
Especially if she was reporting there for what, 20 years, I think.
It was a while,
She
yeah,
was a pretty high profile reporter there, I think.
yeah. When I think about acid being used in some of the Middle Eastern countries as a warning against those that I think of the young girl that had her face burned off a couple of years ago, and she's now very prominent.
Mahela,
Malala.
Malala. Thank you. I always
Thank you. Sorry.
Wasn't Malala shot?
She was
I thought
shot.
she-
Acid.
who am I thinking of that had the acid?
That has happened for sure, but Malala was shot on a bus going to school.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I was okay. Well, I was thinking. Okay. Well, I thought there was a woman that's had a number of facial reconstructive surgeries for having acid thrown, and it was
Yeah.
like one of the.
I think you're
Yeah. But I was just thinking like that's a warning. I mean, that's certainly in that culture that has a very symbolic, specific justice, well, not unjust and
and
culture.
the of that is not just it disfigured her in that moment, but then that woman continues to walk around with the scars that say, look, I did something against the rules and this is my consequence. I wear it every day.
Right. And it was imposed on her from another external source. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Funny.
I was trying to
Not
get my words on that one.
one who sees her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing to mention is the civil rights sit-in. I mean, protesters who would go to lunch counters and
Mhm.
and wouldn't fight back. They
Right.
would just go in and order whatever and then take what was given to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Enduring spitting, which was minimal compared to the hot coffee poured all over them.
Right. Yeah.
I
Oh,
guess
yeah, worse than that, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the boycotts could also, like the bus boycotts,
Right.
could also be considered example as well.
Yeah.
It's the act of
Exactly.
not doing something that becomes an act in and of itself, I guess.
Right.
Speaking of boycott, this might be a little crass for our conversation, but there is rumoring and people are listening about women foregoing sex until the rights of women are taken more seriously by mostly white men making the rules about women's health,
Right.
women's rights.
I have
So
heard of some coming together conversations in that regard. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
withholding sex would probably make some difference. Yeah.
Right.
At least enlighten some people who might not be thinking the way they should.
Right.
Well, I've heard of this one guy who protests Amazon and never buys anything through Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
or shops at Walmart, right?
Never set foot in a Walmart.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being creative and exploring how different examples in both our living and in our shared memory of history. Certainly, there's a lot of things to call attention to. For some reason, as humanity, we seem to continue to perpetuate different and similar instances of unjust behaviors and actions towards others. So it's amazing that we can't seem to learn a very simple lesson. Our homework, as I mentioned when we began, it's a little bit of a longer because we've got 2 more weeks. So I've included next week for the 8th and for the 15th. So I don't expect you to read all of the books of Esther and Ezra. But you can just kind of skim through them. Those are 2 of the minor prophets. They have some pretty cool, I'll say, interesting and provocative stories. And we're going to discuss all the way up to Babylon next week and finish up with the prophets. And then we'll go into I think it's Assyria and I was trying to remember the other bigger, go into Rome a little bit, and Greece are the other empires we're going to look at after and on the 15th. So I'll make sure I get this out to you all tomorrow after I upload the recording of the session. And
Fancy.
She's taking me to choir.
we'll have that. So next week in the 15th, and then the 22nd, we have the social gathering at Hang 10, and then we'll be done for the summer, probably resuming in the fall after Labor Day. Are there any questions or points of clarification before we end for the evening? I see none. So, all right, let me stop sharing and stop recording. Stop recording.